Before there was the World Wide Web, there was a rather primitive way of file sharing and electronic communications, known as the Bulletin Board System, or BBS. In this episode of Retrodocs, we're going to be firing up the old 24-bit modem, dialing into the history of the Bulletin Board System, or otherwise known as the BBS. The year was 1973, Berkeley, California, in a time where microcomputers were not yet around and modems were massively expensive and very, very slow. There came about a concept known as community memory, where there was a central mainframe that was accessed through terminals located all around the San Francisco Bay. Before I get into the first ever BBS to ever exist, we need to discuss a brief history of how people dialed into computers. The very first modem was rather primitive compared to what we know today. When you think of a modem, one tends to think of a device you've connected to your computer and to a telephone line and dialed into another computer, hearing numbers dialed and that wonderfully annoying sound of it connecting. But even before that, the very first modem to ever exist was one where you put the receiver of your phone into two cup-like spots, and using your computer you dialed into another one. The first bulletin board system was born when two individuals, Ward Christensen and Randy Suess, were snowed in during the blizzard of 1978. Christensen had a spare motherboard, S100 bus, and a Hayes modem, and Suess suggested that it should be placed in his home so it would be a local call for those in Chicago. It was patterned after the bulletin board his computer club used to post messages, and soon on February 16, 1978, CBBS was born and had about 253,301 callers, and then it was soon retired. As modem speed improved in the 80s with the 12-bit modem and then the 24-bit modem, more and more bulletin board systems soon came about, since the information could be displayed using ASCII text or ANSI art. However, with the 24-bit modems, some bulletin board systems implemented a graphical user interface. After a major delay, soon the 96-baud modem came about, which allowed bulletin board systems to host a massively large file system that gave way to the practice of leeching, the practice of logging onto a bulletin board system just for the files. However, the side effect of this practice was, while a leecher was on the system for a long period of time, others who wanted to try to log on often got a busy signal. The smart modem paved the way for the first official BBS to ever be born. These are really just used as file transfers, which were slow at the time and were often used just to text files which listed other BBSs and message boards. As with most things in this world, you either have to evolve or you just die off, and the latter was the case for bulletin board systems as the rise of the internet came about. This soon made bulletin board systems obsolete, and gave way to the rise of internet service, which was a way faster and easier way for people to access information versus using a bulletin board system, and certain companies were created just for the purpose of providing the service, often called internet service providers or ISPs. Well, this topic is one I wanted to do, and it was one I had fun researching. There's a ton more I could have included, but it would be way too long to do. The history of bulletin board systems is a fascinating one at that. But for me, this one brought back memories to me as being a kid in the early 80s, dialing into another computer and using a terminal program and chatting and messaging others, and often downloading shareware games and freeware games as well. Most of them back then would be PG, but there were some that were purely for adults only. Hey, thanks for sticking around and watching the very first episode of 2022's Retrodocs. I have plenty more topics that I'm planning to do for these as well as some gaming reviews with my gaming cat Pete. Anyway, I'm Paul saying peace out and stay frosty.